fly.
I know you agree with me that every time that we are able to come together in such a wonderful and blessed occasion, to be able to encourage one another in efforts such as this. And I've got to tell you, I've been extremely impressed over the past few days that I've been able to be here. I was not familiar with the Lufkin area, and since I have gotten a little more familiar with the Lufkin area, you've got some interesting stories to tell in this area. But one of the things that seems very apparent is that the congregations here are thriving and supportive of one another, and that's a wonderful thing to see, that there's so many places where congregations almost have ill blood between them, and to know that the brethren are supportive of one another's efforts such as this is a good thing. It speaks well of this congregation, its elders, its preacher, its members, and also the congregations that each of you represent. And I'm so appreciative for you being here tonight. You may be here tonight also because you're visiting because of a special request that someone may have had, that they really wanted you to come tonight to hear the things of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And every time that we come together, there are such important things that are spoken about. But these things tonight, I think, are things which are of utmost importance to us. Our lives hang in the balance between two eternities, either an eternity in heaven or an eternity in hell. And the decisions that we make each and every day of our lives greatly influence that. They are the things which influence that. That God has given to us the means by which we can make heaven our home, but yet it's still within our power to reject it or just simply to neglect it. And if that's our choice, it is one that is devastating. And so if you're here tonight because someone invited you, it's because they care about you, that you have a soul that's eternal, that's precious, that they love and that they know God loves. And so I would encourage you so very much to take to heart the things that we say. I think that if you do take the things that we say tonight to heart, it may for some people be a lesson that can be extremely comforting, one that will be filled with hope, be filled with security, be filled with all those things that God would have us to be filled with. On the other hand, this may be also one of those lessons that is very, very bitter to the taste. It's one that may be very, very upsetting to you. It may be one that terrifies you. It may be one that makes you angry. I would submit to you that if you have any of those feelings, it's something that does not offend me if you have them, because at least your heart can be moved and it can be touched. Over 2/3 of the country believe that there is such a place called hell, but less than 1/4 believe that they will be going there. There's also less than 1/4 that believe that they know someone who will be going to a place called hell. There are even among many of the religious bodies today those who are teaching that there is no literal burning hell. I was reading about one just simply today that said it would be completely unreasonable to assume that there is a place called hell because God could not possibly be that cruel. And what I want us to understand tonight is something that is very, very basic and very simple. And that is that there is a heaven, that there is a hell, and that we are going to spend eternity in one of those two places. I will be in heaven for all eternity, or I will be in hell for all eternity. And those are two opposites that cannot be further apart from one another. And so what I want us to do tonight is we're just going to take something that is extremely simple. I cannot stress to you how simple this lesson is, and just lay side by side the differences between both heaven and hell tonight. One of the things that we think about when we think about heaven is that we can understand that heaven is a place where there is great relief. You remember that Jesus tells us that, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden, and I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, for I am meek and lowly." He talks about the kind of rest that we will have from our souls. And that is something that God has promised to those who are willing to labor throughout their lifetime here on this earth. Heaven is a place described in Revelation 14 and verse 13, where John says, "I heard a voice from heaven saying to me, 'Write, blessed are the dead who die in the Lord from now on. Yes, says the Spirit, that they may rest from their labors, and their works follow them.'" When you think about coming home from work, you know how you feel? You come home from work and you plop down in your recliner and you put it back into about third gear, where you can look between your feet at the TV. You know how good it feels to take a little bit of rest from being tired from all those labors? Heaven is a place where we rest from the labors that are here on this earth. And there have been those throughout the ages who have labored so very hard in the service of God. We think about some of the heroes of faith that we read about in the Scriptures, how Paul labored so diligently and was willing to go through whatever the hazards may be. We think about Peter, who by tradition we're told that he was crucified upside down, and he was willing to lay down his life. And time after time you see that. But we know those personally as well that labored under some of the splits back in the 50s and the 60s, who continued to labor against some of the false doctrines and the denominational theories that are out there in the world today, trying to discern what the truth of God's Word is. Those are great warriors of the faith. We have those even in this assembly here who have fought those battles, who are continuing to fight those battles. The question that I want to ask you tonight is, when you get to the end of your life and the Scriptures say that you are able to rest from your labors, what labors are you going to rest from? Heaven's not my home if I'm not a person who has been living my life in such a way where I need to rest from my labors. Because I've been taking my rest, taking my ease, and taking my comfort here. And heaven's not a place that's prepared for me. Heaven is a place where it's a blessed thing for God to say that you have done well, and now it's time for you to rest. Hell, on the other hand, is described much differently. Hell is a place that's described in such passages as Mark chapter 9, if you'll turn there with me. Mark chapter 9. And we're going to read verses 43 through 48. Mark chapter 9, starting at verse 43. Jesus in verses 43 through 48 uses some of the most vivid language of any of the sermons that he is delivering, any of the instructions that he's been giving. He says in verse 43 that if your hand causes you to sin, to cut it off. In verse 45, he says that if your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. In verse 47, he says if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out. He uses that idea of the hand and the foot and the eye to describe what I believe he's talking about, the things we do, the places we go, and the things we cast our gaze upon, our heart upon. Those things are put there to tell us that if any of these things cause us to stumble, Jesus said it would be better for you to be completely mutilated than to live your rest of life with these faculties and then be cast into this place called hell. He describes it in verse 44, in verse 46, and verse 48, where he says it is a place where the worm does not die and the fire is not quenched. It will be better to be mutilated than to go into this place. We need to understand and be impressed with the fact that the most vilest of terms, the most disturbing of images, the most disgusting of analogies are used to describe the place called hell. Jesus said it would be better for you to be mutilated than to even think about going to a place such as this. That is serious language that our Savior uses. And it truly describes how disgusting the place is. You know, a maggot, which is what that worm is that's being talked about there, a maggot will eat away at a rotting carcass. But when the rotting carcass is devoured, the maggot dies. Fire will burn trash. But once the trash is burned away, the fire goes out. But in hell, the rotting carcass is the soul of the condemned. The trash that has been cast into that hell's fire is that condemned soul. The most disgusting of language is used to describe the place called hell. And it's not a place I want to go. Instead of the rest and the relief that we're talked about being given in heaven, hell is nothing but a place of pain. It's one where there is torment, and there's one where there's nothing that is good whatsoever. In heaven is described as a place that's a reward. You remember at the end of Paul's life in 2 Timothy 4, that when you get to the end of 2 Timothy, Paul seems to have been spending that entire second letter to Timothy to encourage him further. In the first letter, he talks to him about the doctrine and how important the doctrine is and to stand fast for the doctrine. And the doctrine seems to be that central theme. The second letter has a different tone to it. It seems almost that Timothy may be under pressure or under temptation, maybe to be ashamed of Paul and some of the others who have suffered for the cause of Jesus Christ. And Paul says, don't be ashamed of us. Don't be ashamed of the suffering you may have to go through. And at the end of that letter, he tells them in chapter 4 and verse 8 that finally there is laid up for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, I think right there he's referring to Nero. Nero's about to take his life, but Paul is saying that's not the judge I'm worried about. In the end, the righteous judge, God, will give to me the crown of righteousness, which he says is not for me only, but for all of those who have loved his appearing. And he gives such hope and comfort that if we are of that same mindset that we are getting to the end of our life and we are able to say, finally, now I will receive the reward for the things which we have done. I can receive that crown for which I've been striving. Then I share the same attitude, the same demeanor, the same disposition as one of God's own apostles shared. Paul says it's not just for him. It's for all of us who have loved his appearing. And so we should stay the course and look forward to those things. But when you think about the kind of character that had to have been maintained by Paul and others, the kind of dignity that we have to maintain in a world that looks down upon us, it is worth, God says, a reward in heaven. Hell, on the other hand, is described as a place of punishment. In Matthew 25 and verse 46, it says, "And these will go away into everlasting punishment, but the righteous into eternal life." When we think about that term, eternal or everlasting punishment, as I said at the beginning, to some people they say that seems so unreasonable that God would not do something such as that. One denominational book that I was reading not too long ago, the man was making the argument about there not being a hell. And he said it's completely unreasonable to think that there's a hell because we as normal human beings don't take a rabid dog and punish it, but we destroy it. We put it to death. And yet we're told to assume that God is going to eternally or everlastingly punish the souls of mankind. What that man fails to realize is that even as human beings, we do not punish people in relation to the duration of the time that it took to commit a crime. But we punish people in relation to the seriousness of the crime. For example, a person may commit murder, and that murder may only take 2 or 3 minutes to commit. We don't throw that person in the jail for 2 or 3 minutes and say that he's received his just punishment. We may actually put that person to death because of the seriousness of it. What that person failed to realize when he wrote those words, and what we need to be impressed upon, is God punishes the same way. When we start understanding how despicable, how filled with despair the idea of eternal punishment is, then we truly understand how serious sin against God is. That's when we understand that the only fitting punishment, the only thing that is just, the only thing that is righteous, the only thing that is deserving of sin against God is the fires of hell. And so when we talk about sinning willfully or doing those things that we think may be cute or funny, which we know are sinful, and when the Scriptures tell us that we should hate sin, abhor those things which are evil, this is why. Because the only thing that can punish sin sufficiently is hell. It is right. It is just. It is godly for him to punish eternally those who would rebel. That's a sobering thought to me. And that's one that scares me a lot. And it's one that should motivate me to stay away from sin and those things that are wrong. Heaven is a place where we can be proud. Heaven is a place where we can take pride in the fact that we have actually done that which God has told us to do, that we have run the race like Paul did, that we've kept the faith like those in Hebrews chapter 11, that we have done those things where God says are righteous and we're rewarded for them. In hell, there's nothing to be proud of. Everything that's been done that was done on the face of the earth is nothing but a shame now, and it's gone forever. That's why heaven is described as a place of great joy. In Matthew 25 and verse 21, Jesus said that his Lord said to those servants who had been given certain tasks and given certain talents, and they went about doing their daily task each and every day and yielded a profit, that the Lord said to them, "Well done, good and faithful servant." He says that you were faithful over a few things. I will make you ruler over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord. Many times when we think about heaven, we think about our joy. But this verse doesn't talk about our joy, does it? It talks about the joy of your Lord. What it was that made your master happy about giving you. The things which make your master pleased. You know, there's things that when I think about what would make me happy, there's little pleasures here and there. There's little things of fulfillment here and there that I think of. Even when I think about what would make heaven joyful for me. And to know that God doesn't think anything like I think. And that he doesn't reward me according to my joy, but according to his. If God is able to supply and give me all these things that He's given me here on the face of the earth that make my life wonderful, how much more has He yet prepared for those who are going to be found faithful at His coming? You were faithful over a few things, He says. But when you're rewarded by the Master, you're rewarded according to His joy and what's sufficient for Him. Remember, there were those who were laboring for one certain master in one of the parables that Jesus told. And some of them had labored all day long in the heat of the day. Some of them had only labored for that last hour of the day. And the master decided he was going to give to all equally because he said it was for him to give. And there were those who said that wasn't fair. And believe me, heaven is not fair for us. But it is right. Because the master has decided. That's what makes the master happy. And it is his good pleasure to give it. Hell, on the other hand, is described as a place of great sorrow. In Matthew 25 and verse 30, it says, "And cast that unprofitable servant," and this is in the midst of that same parable, "and cast that unprofitable servant into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, deep sorrow, heart-wrenching cries of despair, anguish, pain," coupled with, as this verse talks about, the gnashing or the grinding of teeth. I've been told many times that maybe we will have the ability to hear what's going on around us. And can you imagine the sound of that? Not just the weeping and the wailing, but even the gnashing of teeth. Some of you may have seen animals that get caught in barbed wire. I've seen that a few times myself. And that animal gets caught in that barbed wire, and the more he struggles to get free, the deeper it digs into his flesh. And the deeper it digs into his flesh, the more the pain intensifies and increases, and the more he fights. Till finally they're willing to chew off parts of their own bodies to get free from such a thing as that. When the Scriptures talk about that gnashing of teeth, that is a pain that is unreal. You know, I've heard people say that they could walk even if they lost their legs just because they've been to the dentist before. And they want to try to get away from it, and so they can walk even if they didn't have legs. And that's only for a few moments. And hell is for all eternity. That kind of sorrow is something that is there because of knowing all the opportunities that were lost. All the times there was the ability. All the times that they could have taken advantage of it, and they did not, and it causes nothing but sorrow. When you think about even the worst lived lives on the face of this earth, the lives that have been lived completely depraved from the presence of God, depraved from anything that seems wonderful, even those lives have moments of joy. Even those lives have moments of relief. But to know that in hell there is not a period whatsoever where there's any joy, anything to be happy about. We had a friend of our family that he was very, very sick. He had spent most of his life in a wheelchair. And if you spend that much time in a wheelchair being paralyzed from the waist down, sometimes it's real easy to get gangrene. And he got gangrene in one of his legs, and he went to the doctor, and he did not know what they were going to do, and the surgeon had to take off his leg. And my family was really upset. My sister especially, she was terribly upset about that thing. And she called my dad because he was there for the surgery, and she said, "How's he doing?" He said, "Not too good. He's on his last leg." I'll explain it in the back. But that's the way my family deals with those things. We laugh about them. He laughed about them. He thought it was hilarious. Even in moments like that, to have just a period where we can laugh. In hell, that's going to be gone. Never, ever to be joyful again. That's not a place we want to go. Heaven is described as a place where there is light. Revelation 21 verse 23 says, "The city had no need of the sun or of the moon to shine in it, for the glory of God illuminated it. The Lamb is its light." I heard an interesting comment about this one time that says, does that mean that there are no shadows? And it's an interesting thought. You know, when you think about how the sun illuminates the earth and how brilliantly it illuminates, even when it shines upon an object, there's a shadow that's cast upon the ground, and there's darkness that's there because of that shadow. Does that mean that we are so immersed in the presence of God that there is not even shadows? I have no idea. It's an interesting thought. But it talks about there is no need of the sun. This sun that we depend on so very much, it's not even needed anymore. The moon, it's not even needed anymore because God is the light. God is the source of enlightenment and light in that place. And that is a wonderful thing. Hell, on the other hand, is described in places such as Matthew 8 and verse 12. where Jesus says, but the sons of the kingdom will be cast out into outer darkness. And he uses that phrase so many times in the Scriptures. And he says again that there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. I've been told that if you spend just a short period of time, just a matter of about 8 days in total darkness, that you will go completely blind and you'd probably lose your mind. Up in Chattanooga, there's a place called Ruby Falls. It's a deep cave that you can go down into. As you go deep, deep, deep into this cave, they take you to a place in there and they shut off all the lights to show you what complete darkness is. And it does not take long, a matter of a few seconds, where that darkness feels like it is a weight. It feels like a jacket that you are wearing. It feels heavy. You can feel it. And to know that there is a place that is even more intense than that, an outer darkness, where there is never anything to see again, a place of torment in such a fashion as that, that is a burdensome thing, to never see anything again. Heaven, as we said a moment ago, is that place where it's filled with light. In heaven, we're told that we're going to see the face of God. Seeing the face of God, there's places in the Scriptures where it talks about if any man were to see God, he'd be destroyed. It would kill him. And to know that on that day we see him face to face. Seeing the Lamb of God, seeing Jesus. Seeing the saints who suffered through so many different things on the earth and had their robes washed in the blood. Seeing those people. But in hell, never seeing anything again. It's not a place I want to be. It's not a place I think any of us want anyone to be. But it is a place where there will be so many. Heaven is described as a place that's going to be filled with the people who are righteous. Remember Revelation 22 and verse 14. Here it says, blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have the right. If you mark in your Bibles, if you underline something, I underline that in my Bible, the right. Blessed are those who do his commandments, that they may have the right to the tree of life and may enter through the gates of the city. Those who have done well are going to be in heaven. And it says that they have the right to be there. Not because we've earned it or merited it. We're not talking about any of those types of things. But God said it is right for some people to be there. God said it is right for those who have made certain choices in their life. Those who have done his commandments. It is right, God says, for them to have the tree of life. It is right for you to enter into the gates of heaven. It is right for you to be in the presence of God and not be ashamed. It is right for you to be there with all the redeemed of all the ages. It is right for you to be along the side of all those great heroes you read about in Hebrews chapter 11. Brethren, it is right for you to be there. We should never be victims. We should never be doubtful. We should always be pressing forward because, brethren, it is right for us to be there. God has deemed it so. God has made it so. God, by his grace, has provided it to be so. And we are taking advantage of it. The fact that you're here tonight shows that that's what you want. That you want to have part of that tree of life. And you have the right to it. If you maintain the course. And if you'll stay faithful and do those things that are there. There is a place that is right for us. Hell, on the other hand, is described as a place where there's nothing but the wicked. Revelation 21 verse 8 says that the cowardly and the unbelieving, the abominable, murderers, sexually immoral, sorcerers, idolaters, and all liars shall have their part in the lake which burns with fire and brimstone, which is the second death. I saw a tract one time that says, what do you have to do to go to hell? And when you opened it up, there was nothing inside. It was blank. It meant that you don't have to do anything. Some of these sins that are here, they're overtly committed. Sorcery, idolatry, murder, lying. Those things are overt sins. They do them outwardly. Things like cowardly and unbelieving, you can do that without moving a muscle. Call to action is made, and we sit back and do nothing. Can you imagine being locked in a room for an hour with these types of people? People who have no courage whatsoever. People who are sexually immoral and abominable. Not just those who have committed adultery against their spouses, child molesters, rapists, those who engage in homosexual activities. Can you imagine being locked in a room where people are doing such perverse things as that? for even an hour? You know how uncomfortable you are when you're in those places? And yet the Scriptures tell us that hell is a place where it's filled with such people. And it's not just the idolaters and the sorcerers and the sexually immoral and the murderers, but also the ones who are cowardly and those who are unbelieving. You know, we all have family members. It's something that saddens me every time I think about it. I have one family member, one, that left this earth that I have confidence was prepared to see God. One. That hurts. That's the only family member I ever want to see again. The rest of them that left this earth were not ready. Atheists, idolaters, drunkards, extortionists, all sorts of people that I loved while they were here. They were family. And it hurt when I went to their funerals. But I never want to see them again. And I believe it's also true that they never want to see me again. Because they are in a place that is unimaginable. Because they were not ready. It hurts to know that. But what does it move me to do? Does it move me to make my life different to where I can be among those who are righteous, who are actually doing those things which are right? 1 John 3 verse 7 says that, let no one deceive you. He who practices righteousness is righteous. Am I about practicing righteousness? Or am I still being cowardly? I don't engage in abominable acts and murders and sexual immorality and those types of, but am I a coward? Am I a coward? Do I lie? Am I unbelieving and doubting the God of heaven? All the very worst people, the immoral, the insolent, the disrespectful, the violent, they're going to be there. There was a father, the story is told of a father that was on his deathbed, and he had his two sons gathered nearby his bed as he knew that this was his last few breaths. And he turned to the one son and he said, "Good night, son." And he said to the other, "Goodbye." And I think you already understand what the illustration is about. The son's asking, why did you say to one good night and the other goodbye? And he said to the one, "Good night, because you've been a faithful Christian. And you're ready to meet your God. And if you maintain that type of integrity, I will see you again." But to the other son, he said, "You're unfaithful. You knew the way of truth and you would not obey it. And you've been rebellious against the God of heaven. I say to you, goodbye, because we will never see each other again if you do not change." Brethren, those types of things hurt. But I think probably each one of us in this audience can identify with that. What are we going to do about it? What are we going to do about that? How long will we put off doing something about that? Time is ticking away. We can look at that clock and that hand just ticks constantly. And you can't stop it. Try as you may, you can't slow it down. It is ever drawing nearer. Heaven is described as a place where there is the presence of God. And when we consider all the hardships that we may have to go through, just the fact that as Revelation 22 and verse 4 says, that they shall see His face and His name shall be on their foreheads. To know that just seeing His face, doesn't that make it all worth it? Doesn't that make everything that we have to go through, all the burdens we have to bear, all the persecution doesn't it make it all worth it? Just to know that we can see His face. You know, back many, many years ago, the story is told about a young boy that was on a train going across New Mexico to California. And if you've ever been out through that area, you know how bleak it is, how desolate it is. And this young boy was on this train by himself, and an older gentleman said, "Son, don't you ever get tired?" And he said, "Well, a little. But see, my father's waiting for me in California." And it made the trip worth it. I've taken some long journeys before. I've gotten on airplanes and flown and flown and flown and wondered how in the world did they ever get enough gasoline into this airplane to fly as long as we've been flying. And I did not enjoy the flight. You're sitting in one seat 13, 15 hours. And it's not pleasant. You know why we did it? We had family we wanted to see. And once you saw that family, it made it all worth it. Because in a few months, the next year, you did it all over again. And this life is that way. There are things in it that aren't pleasant. There's little moments here and there that are wonderful and great. But we go through it because we want to see the Father, because He is there. Hell, on the other hand, is described as a place where there is no longer a presence of God whatsoever. Instead, it is a place where Satan is going to be. And understand, please, that Satan is not the Lord of hell, where he is going around with a pitchfork and torturing people on an individual basis. Matthew 25 tells us very plainly in verse 41 that then he will also say to those on the left hand, "Depart from me, you cursed, into everlasting fire prepared for the devil and his angels. The devil and his angels and those who do his will be cast into hell's fire, and will be tormented with the same type of punishment that was deserving of Satan himself, if hell is our home." How devastating a place hell truly is. If it was a place that was prepared for him, not for us, prepared for him and his angels, and yet we share the same destiny when we rebel, brethren, we don't want that. We do not want that whatsoever. Do we want to spend our unending existence completely devoid of all the blessings that just come merely from the presence of God? God lets His sun shine on those who are just and unjust, the good, the bad, equally. And to know that even the simplest of blessings will be removed is unimaginable. Heaven is a place that's described as a place of satisfaction. Revelation 21 and verse 4. I don't know how many times. Pat can probably share this, and some of you could probably share it as well. I don't know how many times I've read this verse at funerals. And what a great blessing it is that I can look to family members of someone who is lying in a casket, whose shell, rather, is laying in a casket, and read this verse where it says that God will wipe away every tear from their eyes. That there shall be no more death, nor sorrow, nor crying. There shall be no more pain, for the former things have passed away. Everything will be made right. And I think that's what's being talked about. Everything will be made right. Remember how it was when your mother would come out there, you fell down on your bicycle, you had your skint knee, and your mother would come out there and she'd wipe the little tear from your eye and give you a kiss on the forehead. It made everything okay. To know that the God of heaven is described as one who reaches down and He wipes the tears from our eyes and He makes everything all right. You know, people ask the question so often, and it is a good one that we should study on more often. How is it that I could live here on this earth and have those that I love so much, and then us to be eternally parted from one another, and yet heaven be described as a place where there are no tears? I think when we ask the question, we fail to understand just how truly great heaven is, and how truly right God makes things to where even the temptation of doubt and sorrow can be removed. You know, many times I think of it almost like the small child that's in the mother's womb. That child is in that womb, and it hears voices, and there's shadows and things that are going on while that baby is in the womb. But until that baby is actually born, it has not yet experienced what life truly is outside of that arena. We've never experienced what heaven is like. And right now there are shadows and figures and sounds and voices from that side that we have revealed for us in the Scriptures. But we've not yet lived it. And so we should not doubt. Revelation 21 verse 4 is an encouraging verse. And yet verses such as Luke 16 and verse 25 are so very frightening and haunting. Where the rich man that was having the conversation with Abraham from Hades, Abraham says to him, "Son, remember that in your lifetime you received your good things, and likewise Lazarus evil things, but now he is comforted, and you are tormented." I think the thing that makes hell hell is the realization that Abraham shared with this rich man. That there is the aspect, that idea of that physical type of torment and punishment that's there. But to live with regret. Brethren, I've done things that are horrible, and you have as well, that we wish we had never done. But to tell you the truth, the thing that hurts me more than anything else is the realization of the things I did not do that I should have done. And I think that's what that rich man was being confronted with. You had your good things. You could have used them. You could have been a benefit to someone else, and you weren't. You had your good things. Now Lazarus is comforted, and you are in torment. He was worried about his brothers, but it was too late to worry about them. There was nothing else he could do about that. They had to make their own choices. He had an opportunity, but he didn't take advantage of it. That regret is so heavy. When you think about those things that you regret, and to know that hell is a place where that's the only thing that you have to live with is regret. You know how it hurts you. You've stayed up at night. You've been sick, physically sick because of regret. And for hell to be a place where there is nothing but that. We also need to understand, in spite of all these facts about the difference between heaven and hell, that in heaven it's described as being the place where there's going to be the minority. The smaller group of people are going to be in heaven. There's going to be more people who choose to not be there than those who choose to be there. In Matthew 7 and verse 14, Jesus says, because narrow is the gate. The way to salvation is very narrow. That gate is narrow, and difficult is the way that leads to life. There are a few people who will search it out so diligently that they will find it. Hell, on the other hand, is described where there's going to be the majority of people. Enter by the narrow gate, he says, because wide is the gate and broad is the way that leads to destruction. And there are many people who go in by it. I want you to imagine for just a moment that this aisle right here divides on that day of judgment. And that on that day of judgment, Jesus is separating the sheep from the goats. And he says to those on his right hand, well done, you blessed. I gave you few things, and you were faithful over those things. You worked those things which were right and good. You thought about me in your everyday life, and you used the things that I've taught you to make your life better. Enter into the joy of your Lord. And then as those few people are moving off into eternity, he turns to the rest and says, you wicked and lazy servants. You knew what I expected. You knew what you were supposed to do. You had it laid before you plainly. But you were wicked, lazy, and unrighteous. Depart from me. I don't even know who you are. And when you think about that for just a moment, how many of these people over here know these people over here? That you love these people over here. That you're related to these people over here. That you've been worshiping alongside these people over here. These people have been in your homes. They've been in your presence. They're not strangers. You've lived next door to them. You worked alongside them. How many of these people right now that if you had that chance you would not get up and take them by the hand and bring as many as you could over to that side if you had that opportunity? But what are we choosing each and every day? That's the reality of it. I have those that I live next to, those I'm related to, those I worship with, those that I've worked alongside. And I know where they're going. I know they are not ready. If it was put just before me like that, I would get up. I'd walk over there and grab them by the hand and say, please come over here. You don't want to hear God say that to you. And yet I'm offended at the idea of maybe they'll get mad at me if I speak to them. Maybe they'll get upset if I tell them I don't like the choices you're making because I know what they're going to do to you. I'm afraid. I'm shy. I'm embarrassed. I'm not talented. I don't know enough. There's a lot of excuses that we can offer. But none of those excuses change the fact that there's going to be a few people going to heaven. And there's going to be a huge majority who are going to hell. That's why personal evangelism is important. That's why it's important for me to understand the severity of this teaching. That's why the vilest, the most disgusting, and the most disturbing of language and images are used by the Scriptures to describe the difference between the two. There is one thing that is very similar about heaven and hell, and that is that they are unending. Whenever it is that we are speaking to one another about the subject of eternity, and when we get to the end of the sermon, and as it always is almost a traditional thing to offer the invitation, I want us to understand that it's something that is not meant to be just the ending of a sermon. But it is one of those things where we let one another know that that soul that dwells within your flesh was made in the image of God. That God made it upright. He made it perfect. He made it exactly the way He intended for it to be made. And He made that soul that dwells in each and every one of us capable of doing everything that God would have us to do. Made it capable of accomplishing God's will. Made it capable of having an influence for good on the lives of others. Made it capable of being just like His Son. And when Jesus came to this earth, it was because we had taken that soul and we had polluted it, we had transgressed it, we had neglected it, and we had done everything that was unimaginable to it to disgrace that holy name. But God sent His Son that we might have hope. And that grace that has been given by God has appeared to all men that we might have the chance at heaven. And when we say to people, if you're not yet been baptized for the remission of your sins, that's not the occasion that is the cue to reach for a songbook. It's the cue to think about your soul and say, am I right with God? Am I ready to stand before Him this night? It's an occasion to say to myself, have I had my sins washed away by the blood of the Lamb? When we think about the stark reality of heaven and hell and it being for all eternity, it washes away a lot of the theological discussions that people immerse themselves in. Because I don't care what this group says or that group says about Mark 16, verse 16. Mark 16:16 says, he who believes and is baptized will be saved, and he who does not believe will be condemned. I want to be on that saved side. And somebody can tell me that he who believes and is baptized will not be saved, but I know what the Scriptures say. 1 Peter 3:21 tells us that baptism does also now save us. And for somebody to say that baptism does also not save us, that doesn't make sense to my simple mind. I want to be among those who are saved. And if I fail to believe the Scriptures, I'm going to be lost. If you haven't been living your life in such a way where you understand the severity of the choices you make, and you need to come back to God. God is a merciful God. These verses about heaven, about the right to the tree of life, and God wiping away the tears, and being able to live with the joy of your Lord, those things that God says, I want to give these things to you. Don't reject me. I want your life to be better. I want you to live. I want you to have true life. I want your life to be different. I want it to truly be unique. Then repent of those things. Was there anything tonight that you could see that hell's going to merit the worthiness of sin? Is there any reward for them? There's nothing but temporary. No, there's not. We know that. So I want to encourage you that when you think about your soul, where will you spend eternity? It is a question that we have to be faced with. We have to be impressed with, because we know that both of these places are real. There is a heaven and there is a hell. And we are going to spend eternity in one of those two places. Where do you decide? What is your choice? God said long ago, I lay before you life and death. Choose life. Choose life. We want to help you in that. We want to go to heaven badly, so very badly. And we want to help you go to heaven as well. And if there is something that's between you and that goal, let's get that out of the way. Let's do whatever is necessary to get your life right. We want to help you in any way we can. If you'll take your songbooks and turn to the number that's selected, this song is going to be sung so that you might be encouraged to come. As we blend our voices together, won't you please come if we can help you in any way whatsoever.